Newtown Creek and Greenpoint, Brooklyn, in particular, have always been energy centers for New York City. During colonial times, farmers and Native Americans would cut peat out of the bogs to be used as fuel for fires. Logging harvested lumber from the hills and flatlands surrounding Newtown Creek. When entering Newtown Creek, you'll notice a 19th century building on the Greenpoint side as soon as you enter. It's called the Greenpoint Manufacturing and Design Center, but it operated as the Chelsea Fiber and Jute Mill, manufacturers of maritime rope for the United States Navy, Coast Guard, and for private shipping. Rope was manufactured on site and offered to ships which would come to Newtown Creek to take on crew, supplies, and potable water. Rope being one of the supplies. The East River face of Greenpoint is quite shallow, meaning that shipping would come to Newtown Creek when it needed to dock. One of the tributaries of Newtown Creek is called Whale Creek. It's so named for the presence of an whale oil refinery that used to be nearby that was owned by Ambrose Kingsland. Kingsland is who Kingsland Avenue is named for, and he was one of the richest men in 1830s New York City. And whereas he was wealthy off of the illuminating oil that he manufactured from sperm whale oil, Kingsland was a pauper compared to who was coming. The petroleum industry controlled both banks of Newtown Creek for almost a century. The Greenpoint coast was pretty much a giant oil refinery from the modern-day Pulaski Bridge to the Kosciuszko Bridge. The Queenside, however, is where the original large-scale petroleum refinery in the United States was located. It was called the New York Kerosene and Gaslight Company. It was started by a Swiss chemist named Abraham Gesner. He worked out a way to use steam to free a clear, hot-burning oil from coal. That's Gesner on the left. On the right is Charles Pratt of Pratt University fame. Pratt bought out Gesner and began running the Gesner Works under the name Queens County Oil Works of Astral Oil. Pratt, in turn, was bought out by Standard Oil. Standard Oil was operated by John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust controlled 91% of United States oil production in 1911 when President Teddy Roosevelt invoked the Sherman Antitrust Act to break Standard Oil up into 34 individual companies. The operation in Brooklyn continued on as the Standard Oil Company of New York. Through mergers and acquisitions, SOCONY eventually became Vacuum Oil. They later rebranded themselves as MOBIL Oil. And long after refining had ceased in Greenpoint in 1966, they merged with the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey, now calling itself Exxon, and formed ExxonMobil. Unfortunately, this is just about the time that the Greenpoint oil spill was discovered at Newtown Creek. Some people refer to it as the Newtown Creek oil spill, but that would indicate that there's just one. New York State sued ExxonMobil for damages, was able to prove 17 to 30 million gallons of petroleum product are in the ground under Greenpoint, and ExxonMobil has been working to remove that oil spill from the underground vaults of Greenpoint ever since. Apollo Street is the divider between the two Brooklyn refineries of Standard Oil. One was called Sonnen Fleming, the other was called Locust Hill. On the Queens side, the Buckeye Pipeline connects into a network of oil pipelines that was set down by the Tidewater Company, which was eventually taken over by Standard Oil, as most oil companies in the United States were eventually. Up the creek, you will still find tank farms, which have multiple forms of product in them. There is one operation still refining product. It's biofuel. It's alongside the Greenpoint Avenue Bridge in Greenpoint. It's called United Metro Energy or Metro Oil. They receive feeder stock from fuel barges. Fuel barges are a pretty common sight on Newtown Creek. Oil refining on the creek ended in 1966. The name of the game ever since has been distribution. Tugboats moving fuel barges along Newtown Creek are a pretty common sight. The barges are filled up at large port facilities in New Jersey and on Staten Island. The fuel barges are loaded up with the product for their intended destination, and then they go off to bring those barges everywhere they need to go. The cleanest, greenest way to move bulk cargo in New York Harbor is maritime. A single barge carries the equivalent cargo of 38 heavy trucks. And even 3 miles back on Newtown Creek, you will see maritime activity and barges moving around. It's really quite a sight on the creek. The tank farms that the fuel barges fill, in turn, fill up tanker trucks. These tanker trucks carry gasoline, home heating oil, every kind of fuel you can think of around to the residences and neighborhoods of New York City. The truck fleets all return back to a central location. Usually these locations are around the creek, and these are part of the incredibly heavy traffic numbers that we see around Newtown Creek. Another energy sector that you'll find at Newtown Creek is manufactured gas. You would be led to believe that it's natural gas that comes out of your stove, but in fact, low-grade fuel sources like coal or fracked oil are heated up in a low-oxygen furnace called a retort, and gases are released from the process. The gas that the fuel company is looking to achieve is methane, but there are 300 useful chemicals that you can arrive at through this retort manufactured gas process, including the anodyne red in the American flag and the blue of the Union soldier uniforms during the Civil War. An enormous property at Newtown Creek is currently owned by the National Grid Company. It was originally built by the Brooklyn Union Gas Company at the beginning of the 20th century. Manufactured gas is a particularly dirty process. It produces an awful lot of a material called coal tar, which you'll routinely see bubbling up from the creek. The National Grid people have every reason to maintain a high security cordon around their current operations in Greenpoint, which involve the storage of liquefied natural gas, but they are not exactly forthcoming in terms of what's going on their site, why you don't see vegetation growing in the soil on their site, and it's a pretty high security zone and a bit of a black box. You do see them flaring off gas, which they produce on site when they unfreeze the cryogenically frozen liquefied natural gas.